for each language we have one of the code documentation tool. So that code documentation tool will going to support some of the features of particular programming language. If you wanted to write a code segment for all these mentioned language, then you have to take a support of this documentation tool in order to write a more understandable and readable code documentation. When we are developing any of the code documentation, it should be as per the perception or as per or according to the software developer. Hello everybody, a warm welcome to one and all. Welcome back to the last session of Unit 3 of B.Ca 6th semester subject called Software Engineering. I'm Rohini TS, Department of Computer Science, Vidhyaashram, First Grade College, the Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. So before getting into our last session of this unit, we'll just have a quick recap of my previous session. So as we are discussed in the last session of this unit, we got to know regarding information hiding. So mainly in the information hiding, it is also going to follow the abstraction, right? So it will going to follow abstraction methodology. It will only going to generate the essential features and by hiding the background details or internal working of a system. That is what information hiding. So mainly in order to maintain the module independence, or there should not be a dependency over the modules. So in order to accomplish all those things, we have this information hiding, and also I have started with coding documentation. So why it is necessary to have a documentation of a written code or a source code of the programmer. So it is necessary to maintain whatever we have done for a particular program or a project. So in order to maintain all those details, it's necessary to have this coding documentation, and also it is of two types. One is internal documentation and another one is external documentation. So in this, what each documentation will going to hold, that you need to remember. So in our today's and last session of this unit, we're going to discuss regarding what are the coding documentation tools we have. Along with that, we'll also see what are the features we have when it comes to the coding documentation. Let me get into the session that is regarding code documentation or coding documentation. So till now we have written a program, right? So after once it got designed, that needs to be converted into some programming language. Then we are going to call that as a programming or coding. Then why it is necessary to store that what source code or how the program is going to work along with the commands, everything needs to be documented. So why it is necessary? So while writing the software code documentation, it is important to consider the code documentation tools required for writing the software code. So whenever I am writing a software code or whenever we are having a source code, then it is necessary to understand the usage of the code documentation tool, which will going to help us in order to have this software code documentation. So now I wanted to write a documentation of a source code. In order to write that source code as a documentation, what are the tools that we have used? That is mandatory to understand. And also the software documentation tools conform to standards by generating the required elements automatically with configurable format and style. So when we are using this software documentation tool, that will going to set some standards. So with the help of that standards, it will going to generate some required elements automatically. It will generate the element which is required for the code documentation automatically will be generated, and then generated elements will going to be in the format of configurable format as well as in the style. So mainly it will going to give ready to use UI. So there we can write our code document or a source code segmentation over there. So mainly these tools combine the selected command section within the software code to generate usable documentation with the essential level of details in it. So all these tools will going to help us in order to have or in order to combine the selected command section with a software code. So each command section will going to help us in order to say what this program segment is doing. In order to get to know the logic of a program, command section will going to help us. So that will going to be stored in this tool, and also mainly it will be helpful in order to generate the documentation with essential level of details in it. So it will going to include more details along with the source code than this documentation section or this command section. With the help of that, we will be able to understand it properly and it will be of more readable. So here you can see some of the code documentation tools along with the languages it will going to support. That means for each language we have one of the code documentation tool. So that code documentation tool will going to support some of the features of particular programming language. So here we have a Cocoon, that is a documentation tool that will going to support C++ language. In the same way, we have CC documents or CC doc that supports C++ document, C++ programming language. So when I am writing a code segment or when I wanted to have a code documentation in the C++ programming language, at the time I can use this CC doc as a course documentation tool. This will going to set some standards in order to maintain the source code of programming language which we are writing in a C++ programming language. And also we have a CXREF that will going to support C programming. Then we have a doc++ that supports C, C++ and Java. And also we have a Java doc that supports Java. And each documentation tool will going to have some of the feature that will going to support some of the characteristics and it will follows or it will going to maintain some of the standards in order to write all these documentation or code documentation segment. And next we have a Persips that will going to support C++ programming language itself. Then we have a RoboDoc. So this supports assembler, C, Perl, Lisp, Fortran, and also we have a shell script along with a COBOL. So all these languages are supported by this RoboDoc documentation tool. And we have a DocJet. So that supports Java, C, C++ and also it supports the Visual Basics. So next we have a Object Manual. So this code documentation tool support the C++ programming language. Apart from that, we also have a Together. So mainly it supports the Java and C++. So somehow it's all related to object-oriented programming language. So we can see that we have less usage of a procedural oriented or a structured programming language. So next we have a Doc-O-Matic. So in this it will support C++, C#, ASP.NET and VB.NET. And also we have a Java, JavaScript and also we have a JSP. So all these languages were supported by this Doc-O-Matic. So if you wanted to write a code segment for all these mentioned language, then you have to take a support of this documentation tool in order to write a more understandable and readable code documentation. So I hope you all understood regarding this table code documentation tools. So next let me move with code documentation tool. In that we'll see what this code documentation tool feature consists of. So here code documentation tool should be simple to use. So when we have more simplicity to use the code documentation tool, at the time complexity will going to be reduced and it will going to be used by many number of developers. So mainly it will follows easy to use documentation tool that provide a rapid feedback. So when we have a rapid feedback, then we will get to know what's our disadvantage of any of our documentation segment. So if there is no review or if there is no feedback, then it will take much time in order to get to know the errors whatever we have included in that. But if we have a rapid feedback, then it will be easy in order to make a easy to use documentation tool. So here you can see that we have some of the features of software code documentation tool. So amongst that, first one is related to target media. So what this target media will going to help, what this feature it's all about. We'll see here, view software code easily in a web browser. So we can view the software code or a documentation in a web browser. So in order to have that documentation in the terms of web browser as a web page, then it is necessary to have a feature called target media. So why this target media is considered as a useful features in the code documentation? Because it will going to display the structure and layout of the page with sufficient precision. So whenever I wanted to see the code documentation in the terms of web page, then we have to use this target media. So this will going to include a structure and also this includes a layout of the page with sufficient precision. Mainly this usage or this layout layout and structure will going to be helpful, or it is required for the code documentation, so that the software code can be easily used in the web browser. When we have a particular structure or a standards and layout of a page of a web browser, at that time it will going to be helpful for the user to have a more readable format. Then what is the example for this target media? That is HTML, hypertext markup language. With the help of this programming language, we can see the web page that will going to be of more structured and layout of particular web page. So next we have documentation structure. So in this documentation structure, in that feature, it will going to include the index to pages and chapter. So already we know about the index which we have as a 3 or 4th page of every book. What this index comprises of, that will going to have a serial number, chapter name or unit name, subunit name, along with its page number, right? We can reach the particular page just looking into that index. So here also we have a index to the particular pages as well as to the chapter. So the chapters in the code documentation should include the information. So what chapter comprises of? That must specify the title. So this documentation is regarding what? It has to specify the title, an introduction as well as table of content and then sections. And also next we have a command extraction capabilities. So next what tool or a features with respect to this code documentation tool is regarding command extraction tool. So in this, extract the software code commands regardless of the style used in the software code. So without considering what kind of style they have used in the software code, whether it is top down, bottom up or a structured method, whatever they have used. So by without considering any of the thing, it will just going to extract all the commands. So why? Because each command will going to have a information regarding what is the logic of a code that we are writing. So it is necessary to extract that commands in order to understand what is the logic of a particular code segment. That capability is also there when we are using this code documentation tool. Next, it will going to support various programming languages. That is what languages support. This makes the code documentation consistent while writing the software code. If it is not able to support multiple programming language, if it is restricted to particular programming language, at that time it will be somehow lessly used. So that in order to make it consistent while writing the software code, then it's necessary to have a language support, or it is should be what independent of a language, so that the code documentation tool support multiple programming language and preferred for concentrating on a particular language. And this will going to prefer, or it will going to have a concentrate on a particular language. Already we have seen the table, right? So C++ was that C++ programming languages was supported by some of the documentation tool. So if there is what particular things which is happening with respect to documentation tool and languages supported, then there will be more efficiency. So instead of being subjective, it is objective in nature. So that in order to support a particular language, it will going to have a language support as one of the feature. Next, we have a formatting and style elements. So when we have this formatting and style elements, that make the format of the software code in a proper manner. So it will going to have some of the style and layout to display the content in a readable form to the user. So that special element that includes tags or markups are required to determine the layout, structure and style of the code documentation. So in order to have a formatting and styling elements that includes tags, and also we have a markups, that means that will going to provide a hyperlink. So by having all those elements, it will going to determine the layout, structure and style of a code documentation. But without respecting any of the style, it will going to support the different programming languages, and it also supports the particular programming language. All these features that we can expect with the help of this code documentation tools. And also it includes code readability as one of the best features. So here makes the software code consistent and easily readable. So when we have code readability, So why we are all writing, or why we are taking this much of risk to write the programming code? Mainly to understand what is there and how we are using the logic of a particular program to work. So all those needs to be consistent in nature, and it needs to be easily readable. So that code readability is also considered as one of the mandatory features when it comes to the code documentation tools. And you can see here, when we have a code documentation itself is not sufficient and requires the commands in the software code that makes the code documentation readable and understandable. So simply if I am having a source code, that doesn't mean that we have a complete documentation. Along with the source code, it is necessary to have a commands, what each source code is doing, what this program segmentation is doing. If I am unaware or if I am unable to see that working or logic of a particular code segment, then it is of no use. So in order to make this code documentation more active and readable or understandable, it's necessary to include this commands in that. And also we are not supposed to dump all the kind of information in the code documentation tool. So if we have more details, then it somehow sees that as a unnecessary things which is all stuffed in a code documentation tool. So it's when we are using too much detail, that also makes the code documentation inefficient and also prove it's unnecessary. Without knowing anything, we should not dump all the content in the code documentation tools or code documentation methodology. And we have to keep one thing in mind. So the level of details should be according to the software developer. So when we are developing any of the code documentation, it should be as per the perception or as per or according to the software developer. How they are saying what must be shown to the user as a documentation part, what needs to be hidden from the user, everything needs to be according to the software developer, or it should not according to the coding tools which we are using in a software. Whether I am using Java doc, whether I am using any of the documentation tool which is going to support Java, C++, C#. So it should not based on the tool what we are using. It should be based on the content or a perception what software developers wanted to showcase to the user as the documents. So that we have to keep it in mind when we are having or when we are showcasing any of the details with the help of this code documentation. So by this, I am concluding this session along with the Unit 3. So it's all about today's session. Let me meet you in the next session with Unit 4. Until that, keep learning, keep on growing. Thank you.